Good morning. Today is October 31st, 2022, and we're here today to have a conversation with New Mexico Supreme Court Justice Edward L. Chavez, retired. This conversation is a part of the oral history project of the Senior Lawyers Division of the New Mexico State Bar. And can I refer to you as Ed?
That'd be my preference. Eddie would be even better.
Okay. I'm going to tell a little story. At one point, he's Eddie, I'm Freddie. And he says, Fred, you're over 45 years old. You can't be Freddie anymore. Well, we really appreciate you being here today, Ed, for this conversation. As we discussed a little bit before, your life in the law has been somewhat of an evolution, starting at a very young age all the way through your career as a Supreme Court Justice, as Chief Justice of the New Mexico Supreme Court for a period of time. Why don't we talk a little bit about that? You know, the evolution from a young age with your family through your education. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can, but before I do, let me just explain for the audience that I'm not sick, so nobody in here is gonna get sick from my discussion, and my voice is failing me because of an ALS diagnosis, and that's part of the symptom. So if my voice doesn't carry, just please let me know, and I'll try to speak up.
Okay. And before we go on, you kind of gave an interview about that recently with Michael Stout. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, one of the goals, and now that I belong to this ALS community, and it's a small community, I thought I've got to do something positive for the community, and raising awareness for it was important, and also trying to gain some support from people to write to legislators, things of that nature, to secure funding for research. It's an incurable disease. And, you know, there's experimentation with medicines, but they're gaining us like 3 months extra life or things of that nature. But we got to keep going, and I just want to do something positive out of this negative.
Well, and I would invite everyone to listen to the interview that you had with Michael, as well as 2 prior interviews that you had with him, or a prior interview that was in 2 parts. And for the audience, I would let you know that Michael and Eddie have graciously agreed to allow a link to those interviews through Michael Stout's podcast. And when this interview is posted to the New Mexico State Bar site, those particular links will also be posted. And I would certainly invite everyone to listen to those interviews also. And I think you have another interview scheduled after this one, is that right?
Yeah, with the law school.
Okay. Well, Ed, going back to the evolution of your life into the law, I know that it didn't start out as an early epiphany, but something that began later.
No, that's true. As a child, I never dreamt about going to college, or definitely not law school. I had spent summers and weekends with my paternal grandfather, Enriquez and Isabel Chavez, in La Palma, east of Klein's Corners. And I thought, you never know, I might grow up working on a ranch and stay on the ranch, but I also discovered I was educated in Santa Fe, in the Santa Fe public schools. I went to Santa Fe High School, but even to graduate from Santa Fe High School, I was too dumb to know that school was very important. And I had discovered that some students were repeating 11th grade because they had failed during summer, and it would take 6 weeks. I looked into that, and I was able to enroll for that 6-week summer program. So my 11th grade, I completed in 6 weeks. And I was very happy about that because I thought I get to go work. I was working groceries at the time, so I thought I get to go work groceries when I'm done. And so I graduated from Santa Fe High School when I was 16 years old. But my parents had a dream for me that I didn't have, and that was for me to go to college, along with actually my brother. And so we both enrolled. And after the first semester, I still didn't get the idea that education was important. So I tried to explain to my parents, I honored your wishes. I came to school, but it's time for me to get back home and work groceries. And they told me that they had actually borrowed money for a full year, and they have to pay it back no matter what. So to honor them, I decided to go ahead and stay in college for the second semester, and then I'd be done. You know, I honored my parents. But meantime, I met this guy named Rudy Chavez, Vietnam veteran. He drove a green Chevy Nova. I drove a green Chevy Nova, and we used to pass each other near Fort Sumner on our way to college. And one day, one evening actually, he walks into the library, and I'm in there studying. And he approaches me, "Aren't you the guy that drives this green Chevy Nova?" I say, "Yeah." "Aren't you the guy that drives green?" "Yeah." So we sat down to talk, and he told me about his dream of becoming a lawyer. So I listened to him. And in essence, what he was talking about is there are people who can't speak for themselves. And a lawyer does that. They help people with legal problems and other things where people need to know how to go through bureaucracies, basically. That's what he was talking about. So I went home that night to my dorm. And I remember staring up at a dark ceiling, thinking to myself, what the heck is wrong with you? Your grandpa and grandma wouldn't have been kicked off of their property by the government had they had a lawyer. And so I thought about that, and the next morning I wake up and I take a look at where do they teach law subjects here at Eastern New Mexico University? Well, there was a business law course. It was taught by Ross Sanchez. Ross Sanchez later became a district court judge here in Bernalillo County. So I went to go see him when he had open office hours. I said, I want to get my law degree here. What do I do to start the program of getting a law degree? So you're not going to get it here at Eastern. There's only one law school, UNM. He explained that to me. Ross ended up guiding me through that. He let me work at his office downtown as a volunteer, opening files and going through them. But right across the street was the courthouse from where his office was. So I would wander over there and I would watch Fred Hensley. Bill Bonham was a district attorney then, an incredible person. I thought, man, I want to be like that guy. He was a good lawyer. He seemed to be just even-tempered, etc. So I said I wanted to go to law school. But before that, I didn't value school. I didn't know enough.
Well, I've heard you tell the story about how important Eastern New Mexico University was in terms of it being a very prestigious school, right?
Oh, yeah. When I campaigned for the Supreme Court, because I had to run in a partisan race, whenever I would introduce myself to people, I say, yeah, I was educated in the public schools in New Mexico, and I went to college back east. Portales, New Mexico. And then everybody would laugh and say, oh, they're envisioning, I don't know what they're envisioning, but they're thinking way back east. Well, I did go back east because,
Yeah, it's pretty far back east. So you graduated from Eastern then, and what was your major? What was the degree?
Bachelor of Business Administration, minor in Personnel Management, and I think I was like 4 hours shy of getting an accounting degree, so that would qualify me to take the CPA. Mm-hmm. And so I applied to law school, and I figured if I didn't make it into law school, I'd finish and become a certified public accountant.
Uh-huh. Something a little different than what your grandfather had thought about, right?
Oh, yeah. Grandpa wanted me to, he thought that when I went to college, I told him I was going, he wasn't too happy about that. He looked at me in Spanish, he said, all this could be yours. And by all this, he's talking about like 460 acres of land, because he had a small cattle ranch, small family cattle ranch, and he thought he wanted it to stay in the family. My dad's his only son, and I spent a lot of time with him, so I guess he thought that was the hope.
Right.
I don't think anybody else was interested in well, I no longer was. Mm-hmm. So he was hurt by that, but we did fine. He used to tell people in Spanish, my grandson is a businessman, when I was a lawyer.
I bet he was very proud. What was so after Eastern you went to law school, what was that experience like?
Law school. Oh, that was a frightening experience. For one thing, I'll just put it right out there. I'm an affirmative action student. I was admitted to UNM School of Law conditionally. I didn't have a great LSAT score, and I went to school back east, but I guess it wasn't that, they didn't think too highly of the school. I don't know what the deal was, but they sent me a letter and said, if you go to a program called El Instituto, it was a summer program for like 6 weeks, and if you successfully complete it, you can come to our law school. That was important to me because Sandra, my wife, was pregnant with our first child. And while Ross encouraged me to apply to Kansas and Oklahoma, and those schools did accept me outright, we wanted to make sure that our kids grew up around their grandparents. So it was important to me that I go to UNM School of Law. And so I went to the summer program, and man, I buckled down. I figured I got to get in, and I did. I successfully completed and went to law school, but pretty much out of the gate I was told that me and there was another, probably like 15 of us in a room, and I still remember some, the whole idea was they were going to give us help because we were predicted to fail after the first semester or after the first year. So we were going to get tutors. I guess they were third year, Greg Valdez and Jim Johansson, that group. But yeah, it was the look to your right, look to your left. You're probably not going to see that person next time after the first semester, and probably everybody's gone after the first year. That was the essence of it. And so that was frightening to me. I went home, Sandra was pregnant with our first child, and I said, Sandra, I think I made a mistake. They predicted that I'm likely not going to succeed in law school. And she looked at me and she said, who are they to tell you you're going to fail? You roll up your sleeves and you prove them wrong. So.
You did?
Yeah, there's the rest of the story, but they gave me a chance, which I appreciate so much. They didn't have to give me a chance, and they took a chance on me, giving me a spot that maybe somebody else was better qualified for. And so it scared me. And it was sort of the same thing even when I graduated from law school. I submitted applications to different businesses, and I only got one interview, and that was with Senior Justice Dan Sosa Jr. He was on the New Mexico Supreme Court. Other than that, I didn't get anything, but I did not have a job. Even with him, he had not hired me. So I read in the bar bulletin that Sammy Pacheco in Taos had an opening for an assistant district attorney. So I submitted a letter of interest, and he called me up and he said, you're hired. I said, oh, that's wonderful. He said, yeah, you're going to work in the Raton and Clayton area. And I said, well, okay, I've got a job, so I was pretty happy about that. Sandra and I went to go look for property in Raton. They didn't have any. Back then they had horse racing. I don't know if you remember that.
I do.
And they said they would not have any, not even a place to park a trailer till after October, and that wasn't going to work. I needed a place. So I got this bright idea. Shows how ignorant I was as a young man, that maybe I could commute from Taos.
That's quite the trek.
Yeah, I discovered that because we drove from Raton to Taos, and it was, this is far, so we didn't know what we were going to do. And we got home to my mom and dad's who were watching our kids. By then we had a little boy and a little girl. And my parents said, this man keeps calling you. I said, what man? Dan Sosa. Dan Sosa called? Did he leave a number? Yeah, but we told him you're not here, but he keeps calling. So I called him up, and he said, our letters crossed in the mail. I sent him a letter, thank you so much for sharing your time with me and interviewing me. And he wrote me offering me a clerkship. Wow. And so I told him, I'm sorry, I can't accept. I've already accepted a job with Sammy Pacheco. He's the district attorney. I know Sammy. I said, yeah, but I gave him my word that I would go work for him. And he said, oh, no, I'll talk to Sammy if you want to come work for me. I said, I'd love to work for you, but I don't know what to do. And he said, I'll talk to Sammy. I said, no, you know what, I'm going to go work with you. But I'm going to go see Sammy in person because you got to see the whites of my eyes when I tell him I'm not a man of my word. And so I did. I went and I talked to Sammy. He was irritated. And he revealed that the only reason I was hired because I was the only one who applied. So that was terrible. But I loved working with Justice Sosa.
How long did you work with him?
Oh, that's a bone of contention, Freddie. I worked with him for 9 months. He hired me for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And he reminded me forever, even after I was gone. I emceed some things for him. He emceed my swearing in ceremony, but he would always say, you were the only law clerk who didn't stay for the full year. But I agreed to go work for an insurance defense firm, Gallagher, Casalos, Martin, and Mann. Ed Casalos primarily. And when they offered me the job, they said, we need you to report in 2 weeks or then, forget it. And again, knowing my history and I didn't have a job lined up, so I explained it to Sosa that, I get another offer, and so he let me go, but he harassed me for years and years about.
Well, he was known to have a pretty good sense of humor.
Yeah. Dan Sosa was a wonderful man, and big heart. Yeah.
And so you started trying cases with the Gallagher firm?
Well, it was insurance defense work, and I would attend depositions. Some they would allow me to take, but it was an insurance defense firm,
Right.
and some cases I picked up on my own, and I got more trial work on the cases I picked up on my own, and had fun doing that, but I left there after 9 months too.
Well, there was a period of time that you, did you have a contract with the federal public defender?
Yeah, when I joined our law school classmates, Virgil Lewis and Steve Torres, I served on the CJA panel. Back then they paid like $30 an hour and capped you at $1,000. But they would assign me to Spanish-speaking clients. In fact, David Gallagher, he was a federal magistrate. I'd be in court with a client and non-English speaking person, or one who was not proficient in English would show up, and he'd call me from the back. You're his attorney. Yeah, but that's the way it worked back then. It was a great system.
Did you like that experience?
I learned a tremendous amount working, and I met some great U.S. attorneys, and so that was all a wonderful experience. I still remember Larry Gomez, Bob Baca, just great lawyers, Don Savet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I would bet the comment about $30 an hour with a cap of 1,000 would be somewhat eye-opening to our more youthful listeners.
Oh yeah, definitely. I hear that. They pay pretty decent now. Which I don't know. It's probably not like private practice, but that doesn't matter when you want to do good for people in general. You're not so focused on the money, and I keep telling the younger people that you do the right thing, the money will come.
In addition to the work that you did with the federal people, what other kind of work did you do when you were with Virgil and Steve?
We had a general practice. We did divorce cases. We did child support cases. Had contracts with St. Joseph's Hospital, so we did some commercial law, and I tried some tort cases. I had some tort cases that I tried and enjoyed. So it was just a good old-fashioned street practice.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do after that?
Well, I got a call from Joe Goldberg. He was one of our professors in law school, and he had accepted a position at the University of New Mexico as their general counsel, and he was going to hire a few people, and so he called me and asked me if I'd be interested. I told him no. I told him I really am enjoying street practice, and he said, well, how do you know you would like it better than this job unless you at least talk to me about it? And I thought that was fair. So I went and I sat down with him. He told me what the job would entail, and I went home and I took out my yellow pad drew a T, pros, cons of staying or going, and thought it through, talked it through with Sandra, and thought, I think I'll go give it a shot with Goldberg. Not that he would hire me, because I still had to apply. And as he put it, somebody better might apply, in which case, I said, well, that's fine, that's America, you compete. And he hired me, and yeah, I got to represent North Campus primarily, and worked closely with the medical school and the hospital, and they would take me out to Washington, D.C. to discuss regulations and meet with the Congress, and it was a great experience. And I got to try cases actually there too, because Joe Goldberg's idea was to have the lawyers try the cases instead of farming them out. And so I got to try some, and I'm thinking, yeah. I argued a case before the New Mexico Supreme Court with Torres, Lewis, and Chavez. And then I got a couple more cases out of UNM that I got to argue. So
That sounds like a pretty good experience.
yeah, it was a good experience. Yeah.
And then you kind of continued your trial career after that, right?
Yeah, I did. I was having fun representing the university, and Joe Goldberg called me because he had left and he joined Bill Carpenter. And he called me and said, hey, you ready to come back into private practice? I said, no, I love what I'm doing. He says, well, how do you know you would not like this job better unless you come meet Bill Carpenter and I. And I thought, fair enough. So I went and met him and really liked Bill Carpenter. But thought I would work with Joe Goldberg if I joined him. And I was sold. It sounded like a lot more trial experience, and for whatever reason, I wanted to do that. Well, primarily because I took advanced litigation in law school and really enjoyed that. That's what caused me to break out of my shyness, is that course. And because I discovered that you don't have to use Latin words and use big words to influence people. You tell stories. And I wanted to be a storyteller with juries.
Well, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. That's something that we've talked about over the years, and you've always counseled that that's the way that you approach jury trials, that you tell stories. Is that something you learned from Bill? I think you also attended a course with Jerry Spence, is that right?
I don't remember attending a course with Jerry Spence, but I did go through the National Institute of Trial Advocacy and went up and, oh my goodness, with lawyers in Michigan, and learned from them as well. But yeah, I also I did a lot of reading. I always thought you got to do things that to help improve your skills, and so I read books on litigation, but I also read psychology books. It was an interesting idea, but I wanted to know basically how people think and how the brain works, and where to position your exhibits when you're communicating with a jury. Do you put them on the right side of the jury box, left side of the jury box? For neutral, maybe put it in the center. And then how do you approach the jury without invading their space, and use of your voice and body language, because body language is by far the greatest part of communication. You're always communicating, even when you're not speaking. Because it's your body language, your facial expressions that are communicating with people. And so I wanted to study all that, and I experimented with, I thought people receive information on TV. We watch TV and sound bites, 30-minute commercials. So I thought about themes, and I thought about using TV screens as opposed to just paper exhibits or blowing them up on poster boards. And then I discovered that people receive information, 3 different ways. So some are auditory, so what they hear, it registers. Others are visual, so you have to show them. So you got to show and tell. And then others are tactile, so it makes sense to put something in their hand, put the exhibit in their hand, so that they can hold the exhibit while you're talking about it. And so juror notebooks.
Well, that's certainly a level
of
of trial practice over and above just knowing the rules, knowing how to introduce an exhibit, being prepared. So you've certainly taken that to a different level, and I think that we would all recognize that that's been part of the success of your work as a trial lawyer, because you did a lot of that, right? I mean,
Yeah, I did, but because my experience of getting into law school and pretty much, I figured people are always going to wonder about me, whether or not I can do anything good, or if I just snuck in the back door, so to speak. And so I always thought, you got to work harder, you got to work harder, you got to work harder. You got to make sure that you are properly representing your clients, so that nobody ever says, I went to a failure for a lawyer. All those things. That's what helped shape my conscience, is the fact that I was told that I was going to fail.
and your experience with Bill was a great one?
Oh yeah, Bill was an incredible storyteller, but he was also a legal genius. He wasn't much for writing briefs or arguing cases, really, although he could and he did. But we had a star too in the office with us, David Stout, who's now a professor at UNM. He was really good. I had a different approach than David. David writes brilliant briefs. I mean, just incredible. I believed that a trial judge, because that's where most of my work was done, doesn't have time to read long briefs. So you can tell a story with points and authorities. And so I was more of the points and authorities approach whenever I had to respond to motions, or whenever I filed motions. Because I thought and then when you had oral argument before the judge, you could talk a little bit more depth about those points and authorities. And that seemed to work. And I still believe that, frankly, when I was on the court, you should try to write briefer opinions and get right to the point. And when there are multiple issues, you want to break it out in your opinions so that a judge can go to one section to look at the issue that is before them, and they'll have the analysis and the facts. Everything they need will be in that section, so that they don't have to read through the entire opinion to find where the confrontation clause was discussed, or whatever the issue was. So I sort of took my points and authorities, although I used words.
Well, I think that's
words.
a great lesson for young lawyers. Young lawyers, I think, are trying to feel their way through the practice, and how do you approach appellate courts, how do you approach trial courts, and I think those are great points. It's a great lesson for them. You worked with Bill for how long?
Oh, Freddie, maybe. Well, I think I had worked 22 years when I went on the court, and I was with him probably 15 years.
And
I'm not good at dates.
And during that time, you tried cases all over New Mexico, right?
Yeah, we tried cases all over New Mexico. And yeah, it was fun.
Are there any that kind of stick in your mind as significant sorts of cases, or especially fun sorts of cases? I know Bill always had some stories.
Yeah, Bill was a good storyteller. Well, you asked that question. The first case that popped into my mind, Freddie, it wasn't a big case. We did, medical negligence cases, products cases, automobile cases, but I'll tell you about Ralph Jaramillo, if you don't mind.
No, not a bit.
Ralph Jaramillo was a 27-year-old mentally retarded individual who on occasion would lose control. And his mom would call for help, 911. Anyway, I had received a call. A lady wanted to come meet me about a potential case, a death case. Ralph died. And she came in to see me, and she brought a gentleman with her. And I still remember to this day, she's clutching her purse, sitting there in front of my desk, and she told me about Ralph and how he died, and she thought that didn't seem right. He died in Memorial Hospital, psychiatric hospital. And she told me the story, and I said, I think you're right. This really needs to be looked into. And she said, yeah, I know, but I've talked to a lot of lawyers, and they've all told me that Ralph's life is not worth the expense of investigating and trying the case. He was 27 years old. You know, I learned a lot about Ralph. But that was what she was told. And I remember her just clutching her purse and just always looking down at the ground. She was telling me the story. I said, no, Ralph's life has value, and I'm going to look into this case for you. And if I conclude that there's a good faith reason to bring this lawsuit, I will sue. So I did, and I sued the hospital. What had happened was he'd been taken by ambulance to St. Joe's Hospital he was in Los Lunas, because he had one of his episodes where he would get aggressive. But he never hurt anybody, but he would get aggressive. But those ambulance drivers were familiar with Ralph, so they would talk to him and calm him down. But they would take him in because maybe he needed an adjustment of his medicines or whatnot. And when he arrived at St. Joseph's Hospital, he was not restrained. In St. Joe's Hospital, they restrained him. They put him on his back and they just tied his wrist down to make sure he didn't get up or hurt himself. And then the ambulance came to take him to Memorial Psychiatric Hospital, because St. Joe's thought that was a better place for him. So as he's transported there, he's not restrained. He's just on a gurney, and they're rolling him in. But as they're rolling him in, and this is from testimony from the ambulance attendants, a group of workers from the psychiatric hospital start coming toward him. And I guess he got startled. And as they're starting to push him through a door, he reached out with his arms. He tried to hold himself from going in there. But they ended up taking him in there, and they put him in a room all by himself. They put him on his belly, and Ralph had a protuberant belly. He was a big man. They put him on his belly, and they strapped his wrists down. They strapped his ankles down, and then they put 2 belts across his back. And they didn't check on him, other than peeking through the window and seeing that he was calm. And they also injected him with psychotropic drugs, which is a respiratory depressant. 4 hours and 15 minutes later, they go and check on him. He's dead from being restrained. And so I thought, this can't be right. You know, you can't restrain somebody like that. And I developed a case and worked it. They wanted to blame the doctor they thought the doctor didn't write enough order explaining that they needed to be checking on him every 15 minutes, things of that nature. But that's a typical nursing requirement. Anyway, so when they blamed the doctor, I had no choice but to take it to the medical legal panel. And of course they rejected the idea, but I still sued. And we tried that case, actually, and we did win it. So she got a hefty amount of money, which was good, because Ralph was a beautiful person. He had, you remember Dukes of Hazzard?
Yeah.
He had that car. He had a car that looked like that one, and he stole his sister's nail polish, orange nail polish, and so he could paint it orange like the Dukes of Hazzard, and then he tried drawing the whatever was on top of it. So I mean, he was 27 years old, and he played with vehicles. The people at work, he worked at a thrift shop as a janitor. And they said, you know, if he sensed that somebody was having a bad day, he would pick up his mop and pretend he was Elvis, start strumming his mop and singing Blue Suede Shoes to them. You know, he was just, but he had mental health issues.
Important case to his mom.
It was important to his mom. I thought it was important too that you have to work to de-escalate, as opposed to just restraining like that, and that was not a proper restraint as far as Dr. Lyons was concerned. So we tried the case.
Where did you try it?
Los Lunas. It was before Judge John Pope.
Okay. And other cases while you were working for Bill? Bill was a busy guy.
Yeah, no, we had brain injury cases. Bill and Joe Gober actually tried the case at got the tort claims cap ruled unconstitutional briefly. And it was reconsidered. Yeah, so just brain injury cases, a lot of products cases. And so I learned a lot about safety engineering principles, and that was all good.
And that's where you were before you went to the Supreme Court, right?
Yeah, then went to the Supreme Court prematurely. Bill thought I was crazy. You know, why do you want to be a government worker? So he would tell me. But we used to sit around. I don't know if you remember this, maybe, or if you all did this, but we would sit around as trial lawyers say, you know, it's taking 3 to 5 years to get an opinion out of the Supreme Court. So everybody's complaining about it, but nobody's wanting to do it. Nobody's wanting to run for that position. So I had a philosophy that if I was going to complain about something, I had an obligation to get involved and try to make it better, hopefully not worse. So I did that. So I served on a mental health board as chair at UNM as a lawyer because I was concerned about mental health issues. I worked on the disciplinary board because I was, you know, you can't complain about the system if you don't want to get involved. And so I thought the same thing for the Supreme Court. I was young. To me, it's young.
How old were you when you
I think
ran?
I was 45. I think it was 45. Yeah.
And your first run at public office?
Yeah. Yeah, that was.
How was that?
It was interesting. I got appointed first, and that was okay because you're meeting with the nominating commission. But then the partisan race was interesting. My opponent was Ned Fuller, and I like Ned. We still get along, and he's applied for lots of judgeships, and I've been on a nominating commission, and I've been complimentary to him because he is sharp. But he loved to go around and talk about me as the fuzzy-headed liberal. So when he'd say that, and then it'd be my turn to speak, and I'd get up and I'd say, you know, I happen to agree with my opponent on one thing. I am fuzzy-headed. You know, just trying to, you know.
Diffuse it a bit.
Yeah, diffuse it, and yeah.
So you began with the Supreme Court then in 2002?
2003.
And what was your first impression? First day you get there, what was your first impression?
Freddie. First day that I started, we had oral arguments. And I had gone in and I gotten the briefs and looked at records and things of that. And I was prepared for the oral argument. But we go into what we call the robing room. It's where you put your robes on before you go into court, and then it's got a table there where you can sit around it, and then that's where you deliberate at the end. And I knew that we would go in and hear the case and come back out and deliberate, but I didn't know the protocol. And Chief Justice Maes was the Chief Justice then, and she would refer to me as Junior Justice. And she told me where to sit as Junior Justice, and she said, and you'll go out first and go to the far left. So that was my instruction. But there's a curtain and there's a door that you have to open to get in. So first thing I do is when they say it's time to go, I get up and I did pull open that door. And she said, close that door, Junior Justice. Chief Justice opens the door. Oh, so okay. Got that wrong. Didn't do the curtains right either, because I wasn't told about that. And then went to the left, and I did fine. I think I stood until all the justices arrived, and then she said, please be seated. So I did good. Well, I was supposed to be the last one to go back into the robing room. I didn't realize that. I thought, it's probably the same procedure, you know. Junior Justice, you go last. So I go in, I unzip my robe because I'm going to take it off so we can have a nice conversation about this case. And I knew that I had to go first as Junior Justice, and I was not the author. The rule was you go in low seniority to high seniority, with the author always going last, no matter their level of seniority. Anyway, yeah, I unzip my robe. Put your robe back on. We deliberate in our robes. I said, okay. And I gave it was a search and seizure case, and I thought it was unconstitutional. So I gave all my reasons of here's are the facts, here's the Constitution, and here's the way I see this case. And next goes Dick Bosson. Yeah, it was Dick Bosson. And he says, it's kind of fun to always get a new member of the court. Because you get different perspectives. But I disagree with Justice Chavez. And then he starts explaining how he sees the case. And I said, Justice Bosson, I wanted to ask him a question about something he said. Chief Junior Justice, do not interrupt us while we're talking. We each will take our turn. And then if you have anything else to say about it, put it in writing. I said, oh my goodness. So it was a different experience for me, but I loved working with the court. That was funny. I learned a lot.
Well, and is that perhaps the reason that the robing room has now been dedicated to you and named after you?
Because
that was an honor you received recently.
Yeah, that was very, very generous of the Supreme Court to do that. That's an important room. The robing room is where you put on your robe before you go in to hear a case, and it should serve as a reminder to us of our oath, the importance of equal justice, the importance of civility, things of that nature. And I always thought, I think people probably think this is more comical than anything, but I thought the robe was so important as an indication of not only what I just described, but as us, as an institution, as a separate branch of government that was deserving of respect. And so when I gave the State of the Judiciary addresses, I wore my robe, and I've been the only one that has done that. But I did wear my robe because I wanted the symbol of the independence of the judiciary.
And that was before both houses of the legislature, right?
Right. That's when the Senate and House convened together to hear the state of the judiciary.
And you were Chief Justice for more than one term.
Yeah, I like to say it was less than 4 years complete, but I like to say it in terms of 4 legislative sessions because that's the bear in the room.
How was that experience?
It was fine.
A lot of work.
Well, it's a lot of work, but I'll get in trouble for saying this, but it's true. You have to be unctuous, and that never sat well with me. I didn't understand why you just couldn't have an adult conversation about issues and forget about having to tell everybody how wonderful they are.
Were your administrative duties pretty onerous during that period of time?
Yeah, but not like they became. As Chief Justice, you have a lot of responsibilities. For one thing, you're the head of the entire judiciary, and what I chose to do because I was new to the bench, and I thought that the chief judges and other judges in New Mexico may not be familiar with the way I think administratively. So I traveled the state and I met with municipal court, magistrate court, district court judges, and we would have conversations, and more times than not they would always talk to me about difficulties they were having in their district. And I always thought, before I get back to Albuquerque, I need to solve one of their problems, even if it's the low-hanging fruit. But I wanted to gain the trust of the judges throughout New Mexico. And I don't know, I think it worked. I think I enjoyed I don't remember anybody complaining to me, or I haven't heard rumors of it. Maybe you have.
I have not. Well, and you were on the bench for how long total?
15 years.
15 years.
Yeah, we Sandra and I both decided to retire the same day, and we did, and thank goodness, you know, I could have kept going, but I mean, as far as I was concerned, I could have worked, you know, to the late 70s.
Yeah.
But
During
got lucky.
the 15 years that you were on the bench, I think it's pretty well recognized that you authored some pretty significant opinions, both in terms of tort law and procedure, as well as rights of individuals. Any that kind of stand out to you at this point?
Freddie, I know that people like to talk about the trilogy, the same gender issues. The Chatterjee opinion, where it's talked about the importance of joint custody for a same gender couple when one had adopted and the other had not, but they had raised the child as though they were the parents, and so joint custody for same gender couples. The Elaine photography case held that you cannot discriminate against people in a marriage. Not back then, it was not a constitutional right to marry, but they discriminated against them. Didn't want to do their photographies at a civil ceremony, and so we said, well, not under our Human Rights Act. That went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, by the way, and they declined cert on it, which was fascinating given what's happened since. And then the third case was the marriage equality case. That's what I call it, same gender marriage rights. But Freddie, I mean, there are other important cases. I thought the payday loan case I wrote, where they were charging like 1,000% interest. I've forgotten it, maybe even more. It was insane. That was procedurally and substantively unconscionable, was an important case, and we limited, in my opinion, the interest to 15%. I thought that was an important case. I thought the farm workers, who have for decades been excluded from workers' compensation benefits, was an important case. I thought I fussed a lot about double jeopardy, and we, I think, brought our double jeopardy jurisprudence in line with the United States Supreme Court jurisprudence. As a result, you know, there were some fun cases. There was the baseball rule case, the firefighters rule case, the pornocopia case. The Guild would run periodically, and they would advertise porn at the Guild, and business community loved it because it would bring in business, and there was never bad things that would happen. So said that they could do that it was not properly restricted by zoning. We asked, I think, about fun cases. Then juvenile justice, and to me was important. I had the idea that you know, it's the Constitution grants a jury right in criminal cases, and I thought that I dissented on a case because I thought the judge had aggravated the sentence without a jury determination, and so that was my dissent. And I was the only one who dissented on that case. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court sent it back and said, "You got to rethink this in light of our opinions," and so we changed that. But I thought with juvenile justice, it's a harsh system in this respect. A juvenile is convicted, and if there's not, if it is determined that they are not amenable to treatment, then they get sentenced as an adult. They get put in an adult prison. If they are amenable to treatment, but there's not a facility available to treat them, they get to go with the model citizens at the penitentiary. And I thought, before that happens, those are facts that aggravate a sentence, because going to prison is much different than going to a treatment facility. Is the way I felt about it. And that never carried the day. that was important. I thought juvenile justice, when it comes to looking at basically life without parole, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that you cannot do that to a juvenile, and you cannot kill a juvenile as the government for a crime. But what happens when there are multiple offenses, and the longevity of the sentence, combining all the sentences means that it's essentially a life in prison without parole. And it was the IRA. I think it was my last case, but pretty much just said this guy would be eligible for parole at age 62, even though he was a teenager when he went to the adult prison, because that still affords him a meaningful opportunity to live in society and to show that he rehabilitated himself. But I wrote a lot encouraging the legislature to consider the issue and think hard about it and set some guidelines, which they've done. There's also the right to die with dignity case. It's medical assistance with death. You have an incurable disease. Can a doctor assist you in ending your life? And I said there was not a constitutional right, and that was unanimous opinion. But I remember talking during discussions and saying, and Charlie Daniels and I both said this, we hope that one day we'd be able to take advantage of that opportunity if we face those circumstances.
And ultimately the legislature.
Ultimately they did, and I for whatever reason, I thought it was okay to put in opinions what other legislatures had done on a subject, and then in the opinion encouraged the legislature to think about that issue. And they have, and so now you have the Elizabeth Whitefield End of Life Choice, I think it's the End of Life Choice Act.
Right.
And so in some respects, that could be considered to be an important case. So I don't know, Freddie. I could probably go on. I think there are a lot, and the lawyers will have to decide what cases. But there are a lot of them right out of the gate. You stop me if I'm going too long, but
no, you keep going.
Pretty close out of the gate. I wrote an opinion in Miller versus Allstate. This was an insurance case, uninsured motorist, as I recall. And the contract provided that if there was a disagreement, that if both parties agreed, that's the insurance company and the insured agree, then it would be arbitrated. Well, the trial lawyers, and a trial lawyer, I believe it was David Berardinelli, didn't think that was right. He thought that it ought to be exclusively the right of the insured whether or not to arbitrate a case, favoring arbitration. I'm going to try to shorten the story. I was the president of the New Mexico Trial Lawyer Association, and one of the things I wanted to do is I said, we need a mission statement, and the very first thing we should be defending is the constitutional right to a civil jury trial. And that became the number one mission of the Trial Lawyers Association. Okay, so now I've got this case, and I am assigned to be the author of the case. We hear the argument, and all four of my colleagues say, yeah, Berardinelli's right. I said, no, he's not right. And I'm not going to give up authorship. I'm going to write an opinion and see if I can persuade you that we can avoid the constitutional issue, whether or not the Constitution demands a civil jury trial under these circumstances, which I thought it would. But as we work, we try to avoid constitutional issues if we can decide it otherwise. I thought we could decide it fairly on the contract. The contract was clear and unambiguous. It was not illusory. If the plaintiff wanted a jury trial, they got a jury trial. you know, and to me, the right to a jury trial is important, not just for people, but even businesses. Well, I got in trouble. Apparently, there were people very angry with me about that opinion. Well, they're getting their wish because all we have now are arbitrations, you know, which is I think a terrible thing. And I still believe nobody ever really made the argument, although Allstate made the argument that they had a constitutional right to a civil jury trial because it would have been something recognized in common law, and which I agreed with, but didn't have to reach.
Well, I know that you've always had a concern about the lack of jury trials that are occurring in civil cases. At one point, I think you were involved in an effort to talk about summary jury trials.
Yeah, I tried to, I spoke as often as I could to as many people who would listen to me, lawyers, about the importance of civil jury trial for a number of reasons. Number one, justice is a community project, and the best form of participating in that project is serving as jurors. So that's number one, but also important is that's how law is developed. You can't develop law when you're settling all your cases. And so I wanted to encourage them, if you have a tough issue, one or two issues, try it. Let's say it's proximate cause, just try proximate cause. You know, let's say it's just a fuss over a duty and whether or not it's a policy consideration, which is, by the way, another case where I said, you can't think about foreseeability when you're thinking about duty, because that's with proximate cause and that's a fact issue. Duty is purely policy driven. Yeah, but they also got word, I don't know how, that the court was 4-1 against that position, and then it ended up being unanimous. And so, yeah, they're...
Well, that shows the debates that occur in cases, I guess.
I guess, yeah.
Well, another issue that you were on the forefront of is non-English speaking jurors.
Right.
You were very involved in that.
Yeah, one of the opinions said that there was always this concern that if you have an interpreter for a member of the jury, which is a constitutional right, under our Constitution, there's a constitutional right for you to serve as a juror despite your ability or inability to speak the English language. The concern was, what do you do? They get into deliberations, and how is everybody going to be satisfied that the interpreter is not a 13th juror, basically maybe accurately or inaccurately interpreting for the individual and deliberating and trying to persuade as opposed to just doing their job. And so I wrote the opinion that tried to help in that process, by the way, and wrote jury instructions in that opinion. Unheard of, they told me, we don't do that. We send it to jury instruction, the Uniform Jury Instruction Committee. And I said, well, you might do that, but people are going to read our opinion, and they need guidance. We can't wait a year or two for the UJI committee to come up with something, and you know, they can tweak this if they want. So, and they bought it. So I did that in a few cases because I do think it's important for courts to get it right.
Well, and it's certainly good guidance for the attorneys too, because
Yeah.
they have an idea what's coming, maybe how to approach things. Well, it
Yeah.
sounds like all of those issues were kind of under the umbrella of access to justice, which is kind of something that you were championing also.
Yeah, access to justice, yeah, it's very important, and equal protection. To me, that's the big thing. The equal application of the laws to people and businesses was very important.
Well, you certainly had a full plate while you were on the court, and after you retired, you didn't stop. You kept doing things. What sort of things were you doing?
Yeah, well, I had two main hobbies. One was actively participating in our democracy. I would talk to young people, schools, colleges, and I would talk about the importance of actively participating in our democracy. And you know, because if you're not at the table helping to set an agenda, you have no idea whether those people who are at the table are even aware of your interest or your concerns. And so you have to be at the table. Always be active. Go to or participate in civic organizations and government where decisions are made on improving the life of people, your loved ones. If you have concerns about them, then you have to be active. You have to get out and beat the drum, so to speak. And I figured if I need to practice what I preach, and then I can continue preaching. It's not do as I say, not as I do, as I hang out at the house. So I did that, and I did things for all three branches of government, volunteer work for all three branches of government. But I also did contract work for David Grace, the Secretary of Health and Human Services now, and also, he's got the two roles. But my goal was behavioral health in New Mexico took a real hit under a previous administration. The behavioral health programs were accused of fraud, and so they were shut down. But they were wrongly accused of fraud, and so they ended up suing. Well, lawsuits are fine, but you got to resolve these issues if you can, because litigation takes years. And so I decided to help work as a lawyer to try to resolve those cases, and we did get them resolved, so that we could have start rebuilding our behavioral health system. So I did that. I served on a transition committee for the current governor for corrections. Came up with, I think, good ideas. We worked a lot on criminal justice programs. And then the last project I did was redistricting, which was a wonderful experience. I mean, I got to travel the state. I got to meet a lot of wonderful people, and it was the first time that we've had a citizens redistricting committee. Difficulty. I mean, it had its problems, and they're trying to fix it. And I know they're going to push for a constitutional amendment for a citizen redistricting committee. But they need to solve some problems. The intent was to have balance, gender balance, racial balance, geographic balance, things, the important things. But it didn't work out that way. But we had to do our job. And I'll tell you that from my perspective, the commissioners all did their job in a way that I thought was neutral. But they also believed that it was imbalanced. I mean, we only have one female, for example, and most of us were from Albuquerque. That just wasn't right. Then we had to experiment with, well, how much time? The legislature gives you like 2 minutes to talk about legislation. Well, I thought this is right out of the gate. I want people to be able to share their concerns. What is define for us your community of interest, why it's important to you, why it's important to the community, and what are the boundaries that you expect. So I gave them unlimited time to speak. And I know that some of the commissioners thought this guy's a Looney Tune, but we learned a lot from that process. And we heard from Frank Sanchez down in Roswell about minorities and the litigation that had preceded. We learned about Native American issues that are so important to our state. And we were able to define communities of interest, and ultimately we made our recommendations. That was the final thing, because the legislature tweaked them here or there and whatnot. But actually that was another opinion I wrote while I was on the court, redistricting opinion, and we followed it for guidance.
So did you feel that the commission was a worthwhile experience, and that's why you feel it should be a constitutional sort of?
I thought it was. I thought it was a great way to approach redistricting. It's occurring in other states and with a lot of success. It's a shame what we see happening in our democracy. It's where you're not trusting the system. And
Well, in that regard, I mean, you've been at it for a while. You've been at it for more than 40 years, and as a lawyer and as a justice and post justice work. You know, we as lawyers, I think, understand the importance of the judicial system and the judiciary. But from your perspective, you know, what is the importance of the system and what challenges does the system face that need to be addressed?
Which system are you talking
Judicial
about?
system.
Oh, the judicial system? Oh, I think that I think all branches of government, frankly, we need to do a better job of exploring and implementing evidence-based best practices. We have to do a better job of sharing data in our state, particularly in criminal justice. Data should be shared in a way that does not interfere with how a particular agency is doing their job, but it's information that is for the common good. So that I think as soon as you start sharing data, you start reducing potential errors in judgments of release of individuals or continued incarceration of people is a bad problem too. Health issues, behavioral health issues in our system, with people going into the system, coming out of the system, making sure that there's continuity of care. That's how data sharing can be very important. And then I think you have to have performance measures and gather data real time so that you can consistently evaluate how systems are working. Even in school, instead of looking at the end of a year how students are doing, you should have interim evaluations and see if you are performing as intended, so that you can make adjustments as you go along. You're not doing the students any favors. You're not doing the system any favors when you are, in hindsight, saying, oops, we should have done this right. We should have done that right. Real-time data with performance measures and evidence-based practices is, I think, essential for all three branches of government. And we just don't do that. Did you know, Freddie, we didn't even have fingerprint machines in all of our jails. So if somebody, so the way we used to identify people is basically their date of birth or whatnot, and you'd send it in, and what if they have an alias? Or they use an alias, you know? What if they commit a crime in Clayton, but they've also committed crimes in Albuquerque? Well, you might get multiple identifications going into the system. So now, one of the recommendations our committee made was have a fingerprint machine in every jail, and it becomes biometric. It doesn't matter what they say their name is. It doesn't matter if they gave you the wrong birth date. The biometric will tell you, and then at some point we'll probably do eyes, but it's those sorts of things. Drugs getting into our jails and prisons. You'd have detection equipment at every single one of them. And I don't care who walks in there. I don't care if it's the warden who walks in there. You go through that system so that we keep that thing from happening. And I think that would actually reduce the hepatitis C problem that exists.
Well, you've always been a big proponent of data and kind of led the way for scientific evidence in the courts.
Yeah. Yeah, that was fun. And Freddie, you participated in that, so you know how fun it was. But judges having to make decisions about the admissibility of scientific evidence in the courts is important. So we participated in a national science school, but we brought science to New Mexico. We had a program for judges from throughout the country here in New Mexico, and we had both Sandia and Los Alamos labs help us out. And I don't know if you remember this, but they looked like deer caught in the headlights when we told them that the way we were going to make our presentations was not a monologue, not somebody just speaking, but we were going to do it with lawyers asking questions. And they ended up loving that exercise. So they learned something about how the justice system works too. But that was, I thought, an invaluable program, and Los Alamos continued it. I've lost track. I don't know if they still do it or not, but I thought that was an important thing to do, and it was fun. And all I ever heard, unless you've heard otherwise, was favorable.
It was always
experiences.
favorable. I had a great relationship with the scientific community, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good. Well, shall we talk a little bit about post work that you've done, what you've been doing lately, traveling with Sandra and meeting with the family and things like that?
Well, I guess we could. I thought that I would keep my two hobbies. The other hobby was hiking. I like to hike 14ers. I've been at all the tallest here in America. I've hiked the Alps, things of that nature. That I envisioned myself doing that into my 70s. I felt in very good condition. I was running last year. I was running races, things of that nature, and at the beginning of this year, well, I knew something was going on. During redistricting, I knew something was happening to my body, and sure enough, I got diagnosed with ALS. So I was not in the right mindset. I was supposed to be on the Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission. I was chair of the Sentencing Commission. And I had some other, I guess my favorite volunteer work was actually at Roadrunner Food Bank and distributing food to low-income families. I loved that. I got to meet a lot of people, because what I ended up doing was, after loading the groceries, they needed somebody to manage lining them up in their vehicles on all these lines. Well, I would do that, but I would get a chance to talk to the people and spend some time, see how they're doing. Anyway, beginning of the year, I was not in the right mindset. I was devastated, to be perfectly honest. So I thought, you have no business trying to think through issues. So I withdrew from everything. I even gave up my license. I went inactive. I couldn't give it up, but I went inactive. And so I haven't done anything. Instead, I decided, faith, family, community. Well, community's in third place, and I'm focusing purely on the first two. And so yeah, I get together with my family, and Sandra and I committed to traveling. So we've traveled a lot this year while I'm still mobile.
Well, you've also been involved in, like you said, the small community that you're in now, and trying to support it. And you had an ALS walk and fundraiser recently.
Yeah, they have an annual walk, and I had a cousin who passed away at a young age from ALS, so I had done the walks previously, but now I thought, well, I ought to build a team and join the walk. And so yeah, I made a team, named it Follow Your Bliss. And the only reason I did that is because we always have things to be grateful and thankful for, and so we ought to do in life what we can enjoy while we can, because you never know, tomorrow may never come. It could affect you in different ways. I mean, life turns on a dime. So I wanted that message to go out, not only because I want people to remember that even if you're healthy, don't take it for granted. Do things that you enjoy in life. Hang out with the people that you love, and enjoy their company, and learn to love other people well, and stop all this fussing and fighting and accusing everybody of being the devil and everything that's going on now. And then, I added to that so that people would know the phrase "smile often." So that was basically the theme of the team. And as it turned out, Freddie, much to my shock, we raised over $56,000, and which it surprised me, but they say that's the most that's ever been raised in the history of ALS Walk. And so that was good. It was a good contribution to the ALS community. It's a very small community, and in many respects, it's forgotten. The sad thing is you can go anywhere and there'll be a large audience, and you could ask people to stand up who have either been a victim of cancer or know a family member or close friend who are victims of cancer. All of these people would stand up. But you do that for ALS, and it's very few that would stand up. But it's a devastating disease. It's incurable. It attacks your muscles. If you think of, tell me if I'm going too long.
Oh.
But if you think of your body as earth, as fire, as water and air, that's pretty much what the disease does. Earth being your muscles, your bones, your ligaments, it weakens all that. Fire being your temperature, you can't control your temperature anymore. Water being fluid, you either can't take command or can't control your fluids. And then ultimately it's air. It takes away your breathing muscles until you suffocate to death. So it's you can be confined to a wheelchair, immobile, completely immobile, but still able to breathe, and it takes away your ability to swallow, your ability to speak. I've already started to take care of that problem because it looks like that's where I'm headed in. And interestingly enough, this has affected my breathing muscles primarily. So I'm starting at the end, so which could be merciful. But then there's the caregivers. It usually falls on family members to be the caregivers, and I think we need to do a better job of trying to raise some money to help them get respite care, and maybe hire that substitute for a week and let them get rest. And what happens when the caregiver gets sick and now there's nobody to help? The individual can't even feed themselves or even, elevate themselves to take care of their hygiene. It's there's a lot of tremendous need out there. But these people, Freddie, are courageous. They're going through this and they still find reasons to love life, which I think is incredible. And that's the other reason for Follow Your Bliss. Is I've read about, and I've met people who are so courageous, and they've got all the reason in the world to continue living, which is wonderful. There's a guy, Steve Gleason. He used to play for the New Orleans Saints. Young man, got ALS. Steve Gleason, just a remarkable individual. He took ALS and he's developed with Microsoft programs to help with speech. For example, you can bank your speech, your voice, sorry. You can bank your voice, which I've done because I was encouraged to do it. And I contacted Steve Gleason's team and they told me exactly how to go about it. And so I've done that. But he's done that. What happens so what you do is you type. When you can't speak, you type what you want to say in the computer with the voice you banked will speak for you. It's a monotone is what it is, but at least it's your voice, which is great. And what happens when you no longer can use your fingers? Now you can type with your eyes. And so he's done that. He fought with Congress to make it a disability for Social Security purposes for those who are not Social Security eligible, for durable equipment. Because right now you could get one wheelchair. Well, if you're too aggressive and you get your wheelchair too soon, but then you need a motorized one, or you need one where you use a breathing tube or something, well, too bad. So he's done a tremendous amount of work. And he, God bless his heart, he's got a no white flags motto, which is wonderful because he has fathered 2 children since having ALS, and his most recent child is a little girl, and here's a film of her. She's playing with dishes and he's in his wheelchair, he can't move. nothing. And she puts down her dishes and she starts pulling on his pants to climb up on his lap and snuggle his dad, her dad. And so there you go. I mean, that he's got the right idea, even though he's on a ventilator, full time, in a wheelchair and immobile. That's a beautiful thing for him. But it's a very personal decision too on how far you want to go with no white flags.
I'm sure it is. Well, Ed, I want to thank you for being here today. It's
Thank you, Fred.
it's always a pleasure, and I want to thank you on behalf of the State Bar for your service to the public. One of the things you neglected to mention is not only did your walk raise a bunch of money, but you had over 160 people walking with you that day, is my recollection.
Yeah, well, I know I bought 150 T-shirts and ran out, and they told me that I had almost 200 people there that were just signed up for my team.
Yeah, well, I think it's a reflection. Anybody that knows you knows that you've led an inspiring and consequential life and continue to do so. So thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Well, maybe I should buy you lunch.
That'll work.